everyone. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. How's it going, Joe?
Doing good. How was your weekend?
It was pretty good. I spent time working on HVAC equipment to prepare a home for sale for one of my family members. So it was a slightly different use of my time. So,
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
yeah, yeah. Oh, you do plenty of this, right?
I
Plenty
do.
of homework.
Yeah. Yeah, I try and avoid it as much as possible, but
Yeah,
it is what it is.
absolutely.
Well, good on you for helping out. It's always a
A
nice gesture. So
little outside my zone of competence, but you do what you have to do. So,
that poor buyer.
right.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about, there was a article which I'll screen share real quick on a Datanami that came out I saw over the weekend. Um,
Well, this is interesting because I mean, frankly, COVID has been going on long enough that some of these analytics reports on businesses are starting to show data about more details on what's happening with COVID. Even quarterly reports, right, are starting
mhm.
to reflect big changes in the economy.
Yeah, it's an interesting finding. This company Alation, they do data cataloging. They do this survey with C-level execs, mid-level execs, and managers of mid to large companies, and part of it is it's a survey about data culture and maturity, and then the other part of it, if you start reading between the lines, some of the findings are pretty interesting. In this latest one that came out in September or for September. But since COVID, this is pretty fascinating. This image here. Um, it seems like companies are getting back to basics, per the title of this article here. The investment or the use of things like AI and machine learning are not as great as maybe things as like the adoption of BI, data viz, and and similar. So it's a pretty interesting finding, and I think it sort of echoes the things that we're seeing out in the real world as well.
Yeah,
The
definitely. I mean, some of our clients, lots of companies around Utah and around the country have gone through some difficulties with the big economic changes with COVID. And I think we've seen that directly affect initiatives, some of the
hmm
customers.
Yeah, what are some of the things that we've seen change since COVID?
Yeah, I mean, as we were talking about earlier, there is this really back to the basics focus. Like, how do we think about our supply chain? How do we understand our customer? And we complain a lot about businesses and things that aren't going well, right? Because that's kind of our job. Our job is to come in and find problems and ideally fix them. But the reality is that any company that's a going concern that keeps bringing in money, paying its employees, and selling things is doing all right. That's not easy to do. It's not easy to be a going concern and have an operating business. But I think there's a degree of complacency that can happen. If your business is very stable, then maybe you kind of ignore data sometimes. You keep selling products to the same customers and you keep paying your employees. But COVID suddenly didn't allow that to happen anymore, right? It just shook everything up. The people who were buying changed dramatically. The types of items the companies were selling changed dramatically within a matter of weeks in many cases. And so suddenly they had to have data. And the shiny objects like AI and ML didn't matter quite as much anymore because in practice, those were probably more prestige projects and not quite as important to the core business. And suddenly it became clear, hey, we have to realign our business. We actually need to go know what's going on in the details.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. It seemed like if the AI projects didn't have traction before COVID, I think we saw a lot of those getting cut out,
Yeah.
budgets almost immediately, and and in some cases, data science teams getting the axe as well, which sucks,
Well,
for
the other thing we
the
saw is that data
teams.
scientists actually ended up shifting more to core business value, right? Like
Yep.
just understanding data quality and fixing it.
Right. Yeah. Fixing fundamental issues, which is always a good thing. I think it was a good realignment. But and it's interesting too, seeing where the companies chose to, reinvest and reallocate resources. So, like this article and the Alation report definitely echo what we see. Where I know with several companies that we've seen, that it was uh, AI was replaced by BI
Yep.
because they found out they needed to level up on the analytics side even more. So
Yeah. Well, the other thing we saw is a real impetus toward cloud migration. And the reality is that many companies that we talk to have been operating on kind of old and creaky BI systems that weren't scaling very well. And they kind of lived with that problem for years and years. And suddenly they needed just more data and faster queries. And so they started looking and saying, look, let's just get some stuff moving into the cloud where we can scale up. Maybe not everything overnight, but some really critical reports, let's get those pushed over.
yeah, for sure. And the ability to respond to your changes in your business very quickly and identify problems. I mean, um, it's it's been interesting too, seeing companies drive more towards an event-based um, uh, paradigm as well versus
Right.
batch. Batch still has a lot of utility, but the ability to respond to things very quickly in a matter of minutes or seconds is, I think, it's still somewhat of a luxury to have depending on the business
Yeah.
that you're in. But I expect that even that is going to be table stakes at some point soon. So
Yeah,
depending on the problem you're trying to solve, right? So
absolutely, yeah. But if you think about it, like in the kind of tech company space, real-time operational analytics on your systems, that's been standard for years and years, right? Like you had to be able to see if your website was getting overloaded or if suddenly your traffic dropped off and maybe if there was a DDoS attack. And I think there's been a shift in that direction as well in the online retail space, saying, hey, look, let's do the same thing for retail. Like if suddenly our conversions drop or the number of people putting items in carts drop, that's probably some indication of an underlying problem, something that we should understand very quickly. Now, the really deep business analytics reports are probably still going to be batch, where you need to like process massive amounts of data or be very careful about how that data is processed for financial reporting. But in terms of that real time, like companies want to know, hey, like, am I seeing a drop off on a particular item? And what does that mean?
yeah, yeah, I know several of our clients in the e-commerce space are definitely getting a lot of benefit off of being able to see in real time changes to their business and be able to respond to those. One of them recently adopted InPlay actually,
Yeah.
and I've seen some tremendous benefit from that. Reports that used to be backwards looking at yesterday.
Yep.
Now you can get that up to the minute and are able to capture quite a bit of value in your business. So and I think back on the AI front too, it's interesting because I think COVID, um, if you're doing any sort of predictive analytics, for example, I mean, the COVID event just basically massacred your data set and your ability to
Yeah.
predict. So
Yeah, I mean, most time series models that work well, like Facebook Profit, is all based around multi-periodicities. In other words, what are my weekly trends? Let's overlay those with monthly trends. Let's overlay those with holidays. Well, suddenly with COVID, none of that stuff worked anymore, right? And so you really needed to say, what's going on right now? And what decisions can I make today that are better going to serve my customers right now? And eventually we'll get back to looking toward the future.
Yeah, and I think it definitely helps to have a strong data culture in your business. If you had that pre-COVID, I would suspect you're doing better than those that are now just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And as the old saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time to plant a tree is today. So the only thing you can do is get started today. If you don't, the Alation article was interesting too, or the study. He talked about this Dunning-Kruger effect with most companies. What does it say? More than 85% of bottom tier companies made these great and inflated overall assessments, revealing a Dunning-Kruger-like effect whereby those with the lowest scores were the least likely to recognize it. So that was a very interesting insight where it's kind of like the Lake Wobegon effect. If you ever listen to NPR on Saturdays, where like all the children are above average in the town, and it's sort of a similar belief, and we see this once in a while too, where companies definitely think they're killing it with data, and really there's a lot of work to be done. But
There's a disconnect between like the people in the trenches working with data and the people maybe at the C level we frequently see. Usually the people in the trenches know what the data quality problems are. They even understand how the business is kind of blinding itself to certain metrics. But at the top, you have people sometimes who are really good at digging in. And sometimes executives don't want to know the truth. And so they just want a simple summary report that kind of hides really important details.
Yeah, why do you think some execs don't want to know the truth?
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes, as you pointed out, sometimes our jobs depend on us not knowing the truth, right? Like there's a tendency sometimes for me to want numbers that make me look really good, even if those aren't accurate numbers. Like the less accurate, the better, because they make me look good.
Right. Yeah, as long as it's consistent, right? As we always
Right.
hear, because that's always I think a big red flag when you hear that. 'Cause it usually means your data has issues. Um,
Yeah.
so, I mean, the cool thing with COVID, I guess, if there's a cool thing with COVID, is that it's forced companies to go back and definitely address things like data quality, governance, the basic stuff. It seemed like a lot of companies are getting enamored with, the hot deep learning models and reinforcement learning and all that when they really didn't even have a good base of doing basic analysis or reporting or having a data culture for that
Yeah.
matter. So.
Yeah, I mean, the current state of things, frankly, is really sad, right? We're going to lose a lot of really great businesses that make big contributions to our economy and our culture over the next year. It's already happening. On the other hand, businesses that can survive, there's a real opportunity here, like you're saying, to just totally reorient their data culture and to come out a lot stronger on the other side and really even move into new areas of business by acting on what they see in their data.
Big time. Yeah, I mean, this is it's a mass extinction event,
Yeah.
and sadly, these kind of things happen. And so, if you're fortunate enough to come out on the other side of this, you'll have no choice but to have to level up with data, simply because your competitors are doing that too. So,
Mhm.
it's only to your benefit to start focusing on leveling up now if you haven't. And again, as the Alation study says. Take a good hard look and have an honest assessment with yourself and your company about your data culture and
Yep.
maturity. You may not be as far along as you think you are.
Yeah. And I mean, it's funny, we used to do a lot of data discoveries. We've kind of shifted our emphasis in consulting, but I think almost every time, disagree if you think this is not true, but almost every time when we talk to the people, the boots on the ground people, the people who are like running reports every day, they knew all the problems with data. And generally, if there was a data cultural problem, it's that information was not flowing up. And so if
Yep.
you're an executive, this is an opportunity to go interview all of your analysts and just get their opinion about the state of data culture, get a real honest opinion. And if you can, harvest that information and leverage it, you can dramatically improve the flow of data and the accuracy of the information you're getting.
Yeah, for sure. And it's incumbent upon executives to sponsor these initiatives and really empower the people in the trenches and the people managing them to succeed. And this isn't just a nice to have.
Yeah.
Good data and the impact of data in your company isn't just some sort of afterthought. You can treat it as an afterthought, I think, at your own expense.
Right.
So,
Well, the problem is that let's be frank, these initiatives are very expensive, right? They require a lot of manpower and they take a lot of time. I think the problem in the past has been that it was really hard to make this a budget line item to say, here's a big budget line item for improving our data quality. You could kind of justify it traditionally for R&D, for example, but to say, hey, we're just improving what we have because we have a lot of data problems. I think at the top level, CEOs really need to look at that and say, hey, this is a priority for me. Bring me those line items and bring me these projects and let's get this done across our company. This will really improve our business in the long term, even though it's going to be a major expense.
I mean, it's an interesting observation because we've seen executives, reluctant or decline investment in things like data quality,
Yeah.
which is, kind of mind-boggling in one sense, where if data is a priority, then wouldn't you want your raw ingredients to be as pristine as possible?
Right. Right. I think the problem is that it's been very hard to sell this to investors for
It's
public
been very
utility.
hard to sell this. Yeah.
And I hope that will change. So in the tech industry, for at least 10 years, investors like VCs have been very interested in leveraging data, but that hasn't taken hold in the more general stock market yet. And I hope it does in the future.
Yeah, it's just hard to understand what the ROI of that is, right? I mean, it's like, what's the ROI of flushing, of flushing your teeth or something? Like,
Right.
it's difficult to assess that, but you need to do it.
And
So
the ROI fundamentally is that you can identify who are my customers now, who are possible customers for the future, what are opportunities that I'm just leaving on the table.
mhm.
There are many,
Yeah,
many. Those are some core ones, I would say.
right. Yeah, so it is interesting seeing companies, at least in this survey, getting back to basics, investing more in the, sort of table stake stuff. I'm curious to know, like, with these companies, how much AI and ML they were doing before COVID,
Yeah.
and what the shift really was. But regardless, interesting information, and it definitely confirms what we had anecdotally been seeing just out in the wild. So.
Yeah. Well, I think fundamentally going with AI and ML, as we harp on again and again, it doesn't really work if you don't feed in good quality data, right? Garbage in, garbage out.
Yep.
And if companies can fix these core data quality issues right now and also improve their data cultures, then they'll get a lot more value out of AI and ML in the future when they're ready to return to it.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the only companies I would say who have the best shot at AI ML are the ones that are like starting out greenfield. Like
Yeah.
if you're a product company, for example, and AI ML is embedded in your product, like it goes without saying that it's going to be baked in and from day one, right? And so, but it's difficult to retrofit into an existing company, especially if you've had I would say a poor data culture or non-existent data culture, just because there's so many other things that precede it that you have to set up first: analytics, BI, um, it's data quality, governance, et cetera. So we see a lot of companies leapfrog trying to do ML. Then I guess that's why we're in business, because they give us a call when they have trouble.
Right.
So
It's funny, going back to the investor discussion, it's fairly easy to sell AI and ML to investors. It's much harder to sell core data quality, but one depends on the other. So you really need to sell them as a package and say, we're doing AI and ML, but first we're going to build this data layer, like we're going to fix all these problems that we're aware of and dramatically improve the data we're collecting and the quality and its utility.
right. Well, cool. I think it's a good place to end it for today. So happy Monday.
Happy Monday, and
Okay. All right.
see you next time.
Yeah.
Take
See you
care.
next week.